The Parsha this week is Mikeitz, and tonight's the fourth night of Chanukah. So maybe we can learn a little bit about Miketz, a little bit about Chanukah. The candles of tonight, the fourth night of Chanukah, also in the video, the background here, the lights of the menorah. Light is wisdom as compared to light. Or light. When you have wisdom, you can understand what's going on. It's like a room that's lit up. You can see what's going on. And oil, which is a fuel for light, is compared to wisdom. The miracle of Chanukah, the story was that they found a jug that had the seal of the Kohen Gadol, and they used it to light the menorah. And it was a miracle because the Greeks, they made all the oil to be tameh. They broke the seal. They made the oil to be impure. The miracle was that they found a jug that had the seal of the Kohen Gadol, and then the oil lasted for 8 nights until they were able to produce new oil. The Rabbi points out, in Chassidus it's pointed out, that the Greeks didn't just get rid of the oil, but they specifically wanted to make the oil to be tameh. They could have just used the oil, gotten rid of the oil. After all, the Greeks had they occupied the temple for a long time. It wasn't just for a few days. They were there for a while. Well, they could have just taken the oil home and used it for cooking, for dinner. They could have destroyed it, put it in the garbage. But it seems that they were okay with leaving the oil there as long as it didn't have the seal. The Greeks are famous for their mathematics and their philosophy. Unlike the other enemies of the Jewish people who just wanted to destroy us, to kill us, the Greeks, it wasn't just a political fight. It wasn't just a hatred, anti-Semitism. It was, we're okay with you Jewish people staying here. We're even okay with you studying Torah. Torah is very interesting. It's a book with wisdom. But they didn't like that we study the Torah as a holy thing. The parts of Torah that make sense, go ahead, study. We're okay with using logic. The Greeks were okay with using the mind, but that idea that there is a connection and a relationship with God that's beyond the mind, beyond making sense, that the Greeks had a problem with. They wanted us to study Greek philosophy, but they were okay with us studying also Judaism, the Torah, as far as it's rational, as far as it makes sense. If it makes sense, it's compatible with their philosophy. But the idea that there's mitzvahs and these ideas that are just given from Hashem and they don't have to make sense, they're beyond our understanding, that they wanted to get rid of. And they did not want us to keep that. So, oil represents wisdom. They came to the temple and they saw oil. They said, okay, oil is fine, wisdom is fine. But they didn't want wisdom that was sealed with the seal of the Kohen Gadol. They wanted to take the oil, use the wisdom as wisdom that is rational, not holy wisdom. Take the Torah, the wisdom of the Torah, and make it impure. Study it as something which you can analyze. You can get a degree. You can go to university and get a master's degree in Jewish studies. So you can study the Torah as an academic thing, but not as a holy thing that's coming from Hashem. They wanted to make the oil, the wisdom, to be impure. And that's what they did. Many Jews, said this seems like makes sense. The Greeks have a lot to offer in wisdom, and they even would to be okay with our wisdom as long as we just keep it to something that's just human wisdom. The miracle was they found a jug that had the seal of the Kohen Gadol. What does having a seal mean? A seal means that the wisdom was kept pure, not as not in the Greek way, but in the holy way. The seal of the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol is the holy of the holiest, the holiest. That it still had that seal. That this wisdom was holy wisdom that has the seal of the Kohen Gadol. And spiritually speaking, every Jew, this connecting to the Tanya that we're learning recently in the Tanya class, that we all have our godly soul, in addition to having the wisdom of the godly soul, at its core, there is the seal of the Kohen Gadol. There is oil or wisdom, the chachma of the godly soul that has the seal that cannot become impure. It's that the core of the soul that says beyond making sense, beyond a rational explanation of why I follow the Torah. It's just I have this relationship with God. I can't separate myself from God. It's not because it makes sense. That's the seal of the Kohen Gadol. The oil that has the seal of the Kohen Gadol. And they found, the miracle was that they found that oil that wasn't, the seal hadn't been tampered with, and they were able to use that to kindle the menorah. The menorah was a symbol of bringing light to the world. It wasn't just inside the temple, but it was light for the whole world, bringing wisdom for the whole world. And the miracle of being able to overcome the Greeks was highlighted with the miracle of the oil. The winning the war was the physical aspect of it, but the spiritual fight was over the oil. The spiritual fight, which was the main part of the fight, so after they win the battle with the Greeks, you can still have a situation where you won physically, but spiritually you're defeated. That you don't have the holy wisdom, kind of influenced by the Greeks to just treat the Torah as a book of human wisdom. So the miracle of the oil with the seal of the Kohen Gadol is that we're able to reach in to this level where we have the oil, the wisdom that has the seal that's untouched, that wasn't disqualified, that wasn't tampered with by the Greeks, and to bring that out. And that came about, this miracle came about through the determination of Matisyahu, in a sense, of when they were ready to fight, even though their natural odds were not very good of winning against the Greeks. They were determined to fight anyway, even though it means that their chance of success is very low, and but they're not going to give in, even if rationally and intellectually they might not make sense, but they were determined to keep that relationship with Hashem. So they were able to not only awaken that within themselves, but also bring about to the rest of the Jewish people and to the world to have this miracle, this oil with the seal of the Kohen Gadol, which then gives us the holiday of Chanukah. That's one of the messages of Chanukah. Anybody remember what the topic tonight was? What did the email say the topic is going to be?
Joseph with Chanukah in Egypt.
Joseph, Chanukah in Egypt.
Oh, so yeah, celebrating Chanukah in Egypt. That was a new one for me.
That was a good hook to get you to come tonight, right?
I'll be coming.
No, you come anyway.
I was planning on coming. I didn't get the email.
So, where is there a Chanukah connection in Mikeitz? What's the connection? Chanukah in this week's Torah portion. Anybody have ideas? How Chanukah connects to our Torah portion? The Torah portion starts with the dreams of Paroi, and then how Yosef explains the interpretation of the dream, the 7 years of hunger, 7 years of plenty, and the brothers come to Egypt, and Yosef tests them until finally we end off with Binyamin being accused of taking the goblet. Any ideas?
Well, overcoming a lot of odds, like the Maccabees did, there was a lot of things that happened that didn't seem natural. The dreams, reading, understanding the dreams, and the Pharaoh's dream, and then the brothers coming down there.
But also, a connection could be that under the Greeks, the Jews stayed Jewish, and Joseph in Egypt stayed Jewish. He kept himself separate, he kept himself to his God, and he kept his moral standing and his compass in the correct direction, no matter what was going on around him.
Very good. The Parsha talks about how he names his sons Menashe and Ephraim, which Menashe is, a reminder about how things were, and Ephraim is to take advantage and to elevate Egypt, to not just to stay connected, but to use it as an advantage, turn his situation into something that would cause us to prosper. Avram, will you see a connection from Chanukah to the Parsha?
Miracle.
What's the miracle in the Parsha?
Oil, the same as that.
Yes, if a tzaddik's a miracle. Go ahead. Dina, do you have an idea?
Maybe it has to do with the seven, when he was talking about the dream, maybe it has to do with the 7 days of fasting, and drought and stuff like that.
So the 7 years
Yeah.
of hunger,
Yeah.
or like having no oil, right?
Yeah.
And then Yosef's food lasting for 7 years would be like taking the jug of oil, making it last. Any thoughts? A Chanukah connection in the Parsha?
So what's the answer?
Well, another thing that comes to mind is the goblet that was found in the bag of Binyamin. This goblet maybe connecting to the jug of oil that was found, the goblet being found. The menorah is also described. The menorah in the temple had designs. One of the designs was 3 goblets on each branch. Right? So we have a story about the goblet. I think another connection in the Parsha is...
Do you want a cup of tea?
Sure, thank you.
Any flavor that is there?
No, nothing in particular. Thank you. I think Yehuda takes responsibility. No, sure. Thank you. Yehuda takes responsibility. Tells his father, I'll take responsibility for Binyamin. Matisyahu, the Maccabees. Not waiting for somebody else to do it, but taking charge, taking responsibility. But the title of the email said Yosef, right? Yosef keeping Chanukah in Egypt. Thank you. Well, let's think about that a little bit. The Parsha starts off with Paro having 2 dreams. One dream, he's dreaming about the fat cows being swallowed by the skinny cows. The second dream, the fat kernels are being swallowed up by the skinny kernels. The Rabbi points out the difference between Yosef's dreams in last week's Parsha and Paro's dreams. Yosef, he starts off with an earthly dream about stalks of grain, and then the second dream is about the stars and the sun and the moon, whereas Paro's dreams go the other way around. First he's dreaming about cows, and then he goes to dream about plants. Cows animals are at a higher level of life than plants. So he goes down. It's a lesson for us to be like Yosef, that we have to be grounded, at the same time strive to go higher and higher. There's a lesson about trusting Hashem, which is the end of last week's Parsha and the beginning of this week's Parsha. That last word in last week's Torah portion was that he forgot him. He's talking about the butler forgetting. And our sages say that because Yosef was expressing too much reliance on the butler, he ended up staying 2 more years. So it was at the end of 2 years, the Parsha starts off, it was at the end of the 2 years, 2 years later. Why the emphasis on at the end of 2 years? Because he could have been released earlier. Now Yosef it was okay for Yosef to explain the dreams, but he didn't have to finish off and say, please remember to mention me to Paro, to tell him that I'm here for no reason. He could have just left it to the butler to, Paro will have a dream, Hashem will figure it out. But adding that was a little bit relying on people. And for somebody at the level of Yosef, that was not for his level. For regular people, it would be okay. For people like us, we trust Hashem, we rely on Hashem, but also you ask somebody for some help, it's okay. But for somebody at Yosef's level, that was, that was a weakness.
Don't we learn in various parts of the Torah, previous and future, that we just can't rely upon prayer. We have to take action ourselves for it to happen.
Yeah.
And we even see that previously with Yaakov or Jacob. He just didn't go meet Esau, pray and then go meet Esau. He took precautions and everything else ahead of time.
Yeah.
So wasn't Joseph just kind of following the lead that his father had done?
Good question. So what was wrong with what Yosef was asking? So the level of Yosef must have been such a high level that for him this wasn't acceptable, even though it seemed like for Yaakov this was okay to make plans and not just pray, but also to prepare for war, to prepare for presents. But I think the lesson from Yosef, or the Chanukah lesson, is probably the Menashe and Ephraim. Yosef's attitude in Egypt, where he has two sons, he names one Menashe, the other one Ephraim. The Chanukah in Egypt being in the darkest place. And there, the name Ephraim is Ki Ifrani Elohim Be'eretz Ani, that God made me to be fruitful. The translation in this is verse 52, or 51 and 52. Yosef called the firstborn Menashe, for God has made me forget all my hardship in all my father's household. And the name of the second called Ephraim, for God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. So, when everything is going fine, when everything is going right, in Yosef's life before he went down to Egypt, or the life of his brothers. They weren't in Egypt, they weren't in slavery, they weren't in such a difficult situation, in a dark situation. But their accomplishments were also limited. Yaakov being in the land of Israel, with all Yosef's brothers in the land of Israel, they didn't change the world so very much. They lived a righteous life. but it was contained to being on the sidelines of history, being mostly in their private affairs. It wasn't something that affected. They weren't Abraham. They weren't. They were living, a holy life, a righteous life. But Yaakov, Yaakov's other sons, they mostly were shepherds. They stuck to themselves, doing their own spiritual service on their own. Yosef, he dealt with the darkness. He dealt with the Egyptian, not just being in Egypt, but being in the lowest possible state you can be, being a slave in prison, in Egypt. If you're going to be in Egypt as a free person, it's also, not the best place to be. But being a slave in Egypt is lower than just being in Egypt. You don't even have the freedom to do what you want. You have a boss that you have to listen to 24 hours a day. And then being within Egypt, in prison, a slave in prison in Egypt, is as dark as it can possibly get. And Yosef, being there, starting last week's Torah portion, he turns it around. He sees that the butler and the baker are in a bad mood, so he tries to lift their spirits. And from being a slave in prison in Egypt, he goes, in this week's Parsha, he gets pulled up to the top level in Egypt, where he not only is he not a, he's the one that, you guys, as Rashi explains, he tells them, Yosef announced that there were going to be 7 years of hunger. Why didn't you do anything about it? And they said, well, we tried to save up food, but it all went bad. So Paro says, you see, if Yosef wants your food to go bad, he can also, if he wants, he can kill you too. Whatever he wants happens. So you better listen to him, whatever he tells you to do. So Paro really, Yosef is in charge of all of Egypt. Being in that position in Egypt, not only is he not pulled down, but he transforms Egypt. And I think in Yosef's case, there are two extremes. Sometimes people are tested with the test of poverty. Sometimes people are tested with the test of riches. Right? Yeah, you have the test of being depressed because you're a slave in jail for, accused wrongly, being the lowest of the low, and then you have the test of being in charge of the world's superpower, and being having whatever you want and being in charge of everything. And Yosef, in the being in jail to being on the throne, he stays Yosef. And that ability to transform the darkness that Yosef had, transforming the darkness of Egypt, to not just be pulled down by it, but to refine Egypt. As our sages comment on Yosef's gathering all the money of Egypt, it says that Yosef gathered all of the Egyptian money. There was nothing left. He emptied all of the bank accounts with selling of the food. There was nothing left. Everything, everything was taken. Yosef was working on gathering the sparks of holiness from all of Egypt. He had them circumcise themselves to weaken the Egyptian, impurity. So Yosef is having a effect to brighten and to illuminate, to be a light in the darkness of Mitzrayim, is, I think, a connection to our Chanukah job, being in exile, to, in the time of the miracle of Chanukah, dealing with the Greek exile, the Greek occupation, and being determined to stay, to keep our Yiddishkeit, to keep our relationship with Hashem. But Chanukah, unlike the menorah in the temple itself, Chanukah, our sages say, how do we observe Chanukah? By taking the Chanukah candles and putting it by the doorway, facing the street. What's the idea? To publicize the miracle, so that people on the street, people outside, should see, what are these candles? Why are you putting candles outside? Because we're not just trying to bring light inside our own homes, but we're trying to bring light to the street, to the darkness of the street, to transform, to illuminate the darkness that's outside. That's a Yosef kind of attitude, to go into Egypt and to influence Egypt, to not just stay inside. The Chanukah candles we light on the outside, to influence the world, especially the way that recently, the last few decades, that the Rabbi encouraged the public menorah lighting, to literally go out into the street, into the public space, and to proudly, light the menorah on the outside. Even though originally the instruction was to put the Chanukah candles outside, the Shulchan Aruch says that these days, and this is talking, at the time that the Shulchan Aruch was written, the code of Jewish law, so, for the last few centuries at least, was that the custom is to light the Chanukah candles inside because it's dangerous. So for a long time, the observance of Chanukah, even though the whole idea is to publicize the miracle, was difficult to do because of the danger involved. But now, Baruch Hashem, especially the last, in recent times, not only are we able to put our own personal candles, by our own personal home, but kind of to be visible from the street, but to have the public menorah lightings, everywhere, like we had in Redmond Town Center and in downtown Bellevue and all the cities around, and in the public areas, to have the menorahs on the street to publicize the miracle. The goal, that's the idea of the Chanukah candles, is to publicize the miracle not just to the Jewish people but to the world, that everyone should recognize and become aware of this miracle. And by becoming aware of the miracle, that brings a consciousness and awareness that God is involved in the world, And that's what the miracle of of the candles, of the Chanukah light, bringing more awareness to the world, which is the message of the Chanukah candles.
What do you think about putting menorah in the neighborhood? Outside of the house?
I think it's great.
The wind doesn't blow it out.
Yeah,
The wind won't blow it out.
Will it? But like this, it will not.
Oh, if you had a big one like that?
Uh-huh. Oh yeah, of course, the big one.
so the menorah lightings, outside, and if you pass by my house tonight, you'll see I have a blow-up menorah. It's not a real fire, but a plastic blow-up thing. It's plugged in. It has a fan that keeps it blown up, the shape of a menorah.
Inside
Put it by
the
the
house or
by the
outside?
corner outside.
Outside. Oh.
So, of Hanukkah decorations, even though it's not the actual candles, it's I think the message and of the awareness of Hanukkah is still accomplished.
My neighborhood would be
I-
happy
yeah.
to see it.
I also I've been putting a menorah outside the front door, even though I'm lighting also inside the house by the kitchen, because that's where we're sitting the whole time. It's cold to sit outside, but we put some Hanukkah candles outside also for the purpose of publicizing the miracle of Hanukkah. And putting it in the neighborhood is great. The Rebbe very much encouraged the public menorah lightings. There's a nice article on Chabad.org about the first big menorah and the public menorah lighting in San Francisco. I think it was in 1975. So the story there about how that I as a child, I think it was 1990 or 1991, there was organized a Hanukkah gathering in 770 with the Rebbe, a children's gathering. And together with the gathering in 770 was being broadcast and live satellite with satellite television to countries around the world, and it was a two-way kind of like a what these days is common. You have video calls where you can see each other, Skype, and but this was 1990 was still early for this technology, so we were able to see the Hanukkah parties around the world. There was a connection to London and Paris and Jerusalem and Hong Kong and I think a few other places, Moscow, and we had the broadcast of the Rebbe's talk, and at the same time, kind of a few minutes from each place, celebrating at the same time around the world. And I remember the big van outside 770 with the big satellite on the roof and the big antennas and the big trucks. These days you can do it from a cell phone, and it was more complicated. But the idea of having a public menorah lighting in your neighborhood, in every city, something that the Rebbe encouraged. But the message and the idea is a Yosef idea. Unlike his brothers, which we read, it says that when Yosef met his brothers, that he recognized them, but they didn't recognize him. Rashi says that they didn't recognize him because when he left, he was still young. He didn't have a beard yet. And now he had a full beard. They didn't recognize him. But since he was younger, they already had beards when he left, so they didn't look so different. But on a deeper level, they didn't recognize him because they couldn't imagine that somebody in Egypt could be Yosef. Yeah. If you're in Egypt, especially in a position that he was, you can't be Yosef. They didn't recognize him. So maybe when they saw his features, they ignored it because it wasn't possible that this is Yosef. Imagine even with a beard, you still maybe can tell somebody looks familiar. But they couldn't imagine that this was Yosef because somebody in that kind of environment can't possibly be Yosef. And that's, I think Yosef's connection to Chanukah is to illuminate the darkness. And our Chanukah candles, unlike the candles that were lit in the temple, which those were done, those were lit while it was still light outside. The Chanukah candles are specifically kindled after it gets dark. It's because the Chanukah candles can have the power, the story of Chanukah, the miracle of Chanukah, the message of Chanukah is to go into the darkness and bring light, illuminate the darkness. And where does that power come from? The temple's menorah only had 7 branches, which is the normal order. Whereas Chanukah is 8 days and 8 lights, 8 representing that number that's beyond nature, 7 being the days of creation, nature, 8 being the supernatural, that which comes from the power of that jug of oil that had the seal of the Kohen Gadol, that core of our soul, which gives us the power of Mesiras Nefesh, of determination and self-sacrifice beyond rational calculation, that gives us that power, that ability to bring light to the world. Yosef's bringing light, that was in the beginning of the first exile, the exile in Egypt. We're now at the very end of the last exile. So Yosef got the job started with his, it showed us how to deal with exile, how to deal with the darkness. And now as we're wrapping up the end of the last exile and ushering in the redemption with Mashiach Tzidkenu, so for sure now we have the ability to do it. If Yosef was able to do it before the Torah was given, and at the very beginning, before any work was done in Egypt, so for sure now we have that ability. And Baruch Hashem, these days, the world is receptive. If you put a menorah outside, you don't get, you get curious onlookers. You don't get attacked for putting a menorah outside. Baruch Hashem, the climate in the world is such that we're able to share the miracle of Chanukah, and we're able to bring light to the world. And it's clearly a sign of being close to the time of Mashiach, the end of the exile, where we'll transform, not only get rid of the darkness, but transform the darkness and reveal how nature itself is godly and how the obstacles themselves are really a asset to help us to reach a higher level. May it be speedily with the coming of Mashiach. Now, Amen.
Amen.
L'chaim, l'chaim.
L'chaim, l'chaim.
Yeah, a lot of
Where's David?
a lot of